Hello and welcome to the Red Path. My name is Dara and today I'm going to be talking to you about attending your first Warhammer tournament. If you are thinking about jumping into the competitive side of Warhammer or attending an event to make some new friends, then this video is probably for you. I'm going to tell you everything that I wish I had known before I started attending Warhammer tournaments so you don't make the same mistakes that I did. So let's grab ourselves a brew and dive into the video. For many people, attending a Warhammer tournament can be the pinnacle of months of hobby preparation and practice games. It can be a way to test your skill and generalship with your favorite army. It can also be a way to make new friends and meet up with old ones, or just take a break from the day-to-day grind. There are many reasons to attend a Warhammer tournament, and all of them are equally valid. But a lot of veteran tournament players can forget that it is a difficult scene to break into. And if you are trying to get into tournaments, it can be quite difficult to navigate the complex terminology and tournament structures, especially if you are doing it alone. I'm here to break down those barriers and make sure you can go into your first tournament feeling confident and prepared. This is part 2 in our 3-part mini-series on attending your first tournament. Part 1 covered how to find an event and planning your practice and preparation, and if you haven't already seen it, I would suggest you start there. Today's video is going to cover what to do when you roll up to an event. We're going to cover a few important things: the day before the event, what to do when you arrive, playing your tournament games, and what to do between rounds and at the end of the day. Of course, there's lots of small things to discuss within these topics, but we'll get to all of that. Before we begin, if you are not sure about attending a Warhammer tournament or worried about your experience once you get there, I strongly advise that you give it a try. Tournaments are one of the most fun ways you can engage with the hobby. You'll get to play against a variety of opponents and show your army off to new people. You can make long-lasting rivalries and friendships, and you can test yourself and your force to get better at the game while you're there. Most importantly though, I know a lot of people worry about attending these events because of misconceptions about the people who attend tournaments. They worry about that guy and win-at-all-cost players. From my experience, you are actually more likely to encounter these individuals in your local store than at a tournament table. Most attendees just want to have a fun weekend of games and throw some dice around. So take the plunge, and maybe I'll see you across the table from me in the future. The day before a Warhammer tournament can be a blur of excitement, anxiety, and panic, and it can be very easy to forget something very important or neglect yourself during this time. So let's talk about how best to set yourself up for the event. Having a checklist for your games and non-gaming items is a good call to make sure that nothing gets left behind. Usually, I set out my whole army on the table and read through my roster to make sure that there's no units missing. Once I have those packed up, I make sure I've got my dice, objective markers, tape measure, any rules or mission pack I need to bring, and any other game aids which might be useful. Depending on how you like to play, you can end up with quite a lot of stuff for this, but I normally try to bring a minimal amount of gaming equipment so nothing gets lost during the event. A separate checklist for your non-gaming essentials is pretty important too. Depending on how far you are traveling or how long the tournament is, this can actually include a variety of things. For me, it's bathroom essentials, deodorant, spare clothes, comfy shoes, and a notepad. They're always going to make it into the bag. No matter where I go, there are 2 things that I will always have with me: battery packs and food and water. Ensuring you have a quick way to charge your phone or tablet and a reserve power bank is really important for a tournament. Nowadays, people use their phones for a multitude of things like rules references, scoring the game, and making lists. It can all sap your battery pretty fast, and when you are playing 3 or more games, the last thing you want is your device dying halfway through game 3. Food and water are so important for a tournament also. You want to ensure that you have a steady supply of energy for the whole day, or you'll gas out in round 1 and not be in top form for game 2 and 3. Hydration is crucial for this, so bring plenty of water. Food that slowly releases energy, like protein bars, nuts, and bananas, are a great source of snacks, especially for during a game. Normally, I'll have a couple of liters of water, a smoothie, a protein bar, and a bag of nuts or raisins to make sure that I'm constantly topped up. It can be really easy to binge out and go for chocolates or sweets and fizzy drinks, but these can cause a sugar crash which can exacerbate a tired state. Naturally, your mileage may vary on this and no one size fits all, but make sure you're treating yourself right and you can go further and do better. Provided you have all that arranged and ready to go, make sure you get enough sleep the night before. I used to have great difficulty getting to sleep before tournaments due to excitement, and for me it was always like Christmas Eve. But a solid night rest is vital to ensure that you're hitting the event in your best form, so do yourself a favor and get to the pillow early. A lot of people also like to set a goal for themselves before a tournament. Generally, this will be how many games you want to win at an event, but personally, I believe this can put undue pressure on yourself and create an expectation which, if not met, can sour a weekend of games. You can't control who you pair into or how the dice are going to roll, and sometimes these factors can massively impact your success. If it's your first tournament, the chances are you are not going to win the event. In fact, I would say you're going to be doing pretty awesome if you win more than one game. We are surrounded at the minute by content creators who are hyper focused on the competitive aspects of Warhammer, and this can skew people's perception of what is considered a good and bad result at a tournament. The results that these people achieve are not realistic goals for someone who maybe plays once or twice a month, so don't beat yourself up about not getting wins in games. Speaking from personal experience, I used to regularly go to an event with a win-loss goal, which if I did not meet would be a failure in my eyes. And this led to me not enjoying events as much as I could have, and these days, I don't really care about that anymore. My advice would be to come into an event with the goal of having a good time, playing the best Warhammer that you can, and trying to learn new skills and tricks. Keeping that mentality has helped me to have fun at events when I have lost more games than I won. Before we close this section out, just a quick note on a few apps which can be really useful tools to download the day before a tournament. I use the Warhammer 40k app to build my lists and for quick references during a game. For the event itself, Best Coast Pairings, also known as BCP, will guide you through the pairings and what table you are going to be playing on. For playing the game, I like to have the Tabletop Battles app, which efficiently tracks and displays the score of a game in an easy to use user interface. If you want to play with a chess clock, there are also plenty of free clock apps for this too, and it's a good idea to have one downloaded just in case you need it. Doing all these simple things can really help you feel better prepared for an event. It can take the stressful edge out of the day before and set you up so that you can put your best foot forward for a weekend of fun games. We're going to move on now to talking about what to do when you arrive at the event itself. For new players, arriving at a tournament can be a daunting experience. You are going to be surrounded by nerds moving around their armies, tables crammed with terrain, and a buzz of excited chatter as old friends meet up. This can be a pretty overwhelming experience, so what do you do once you step into the tournament hall? Ideally, your event has had pre-registration through the Best Coast Pairings app, but if not, you should arrive well in advance of the first round to make sure that there's no stress with registration. The tournament event pack will let you know if you'll be pre-registered or not, so be sure to check it for that. It's a good idea to then familiarize yourself with where the bathrooms are, if there's a nearby food and drink location, and where the judge's desk is, and other things like this. Also, become familiar with the numbering and layout of the tournament tables. Each gaming table will have a number, and when the round begins, you'll be assigned one of these numbers, so it's good to know roughly where you will be if you get an idea of the layout in advance. It also gives you a chance to walk the tables and analyze the terrain. Some events will use formulaic terrain which will not change at all between tables, but smaller events will often have some variation, so it's good to have a look and see what you might be getting into. It's also a good time to remind yourself what the first mission is going to be, so take a quick look at the event pack to check the deployment zones and objective layouts. Some events don't have a formal beginning, and players can pretty much start as soon as they arrive. Others will have a little welcome note from the tournament organizer before things kick off. If pairings have also been done in advance of your arrival, head straight to your assigned table, and even if your opponent isn't there, you can start setting down objective markers and begin marking out the deployment zones. The more you can get done before the round officially begins, the easier it will be to finish the game on time. But what about the game itself? Well, I've got some great tips if you're new to tournament games, and I'm going to talk about those next. My good friend Michael once said, there is no other competitive game in the world where you will sit across from a single opponent for 3 hours and engage in a social experience like Warhammer. So how do you make sure that this experience is a positive one? Well, it all starts with something called the pre-game discussion. The pre-game discussion is a somewhat informal chat that you have with your opponent. when you both arrive at the tournament table and before the first dice is rolled. At its most basic, this will involve you detailing your army list and them doing the same. However, to ensure that the game flows smoothly and is a positive experience for both of you, there are many other considerations which you should speak about. Normally, when I begin this conversation, I will introduce myself and let my opponent know my preferred pronouns. Then I like to get an idea of how experienced my opponent is with the game and tournaments in general. Typically, I kick this off by asking them a simple question. Have you ever played against world leaders before? The answer to this will help me decide how detailed and descriptive of my army I am going to give. If they are very familiar with the army, I won't spend long explaining key mechanics, but instead I might highlight particular gotchas that my list has which might be unique. On that note, let's talk about that term, gotchas. What does it mean? A gotcha is typically a moment in a game where your opponent pulls a move which you feel like you have been tricked or led into a trap. Importantly, a caveat to this is that it typically involves the revelation of a rule or ability which you were not aware of before you made the move that you did. Newer players can sometimes attribute good tactical play to gotcha moments, but there is a distinct line between these two things. For example, playing the Overwatch stratagem is not a gotcha moment, but using Overwatch on an Imperial Guard mortar team which hits on 4s in Overwatch, having not told my opponent of this ability, is a gotcha moment. So to avoid feels bads in the middle of a game, part of the pre-game discussion involves informing your opponent about any of these special rules which might be unique to your army. This does not mean you need to reveal an in-depth tactical plan of how you intend to use these rules, but it's good to be above board and let your opponent know the tricks that your units have. Generally, once I run my opponent through my army, the key gotchas and stratagems, and they have done the same, I like to have a discussion about the type of Warhammer game we are about to play. This might seem like a strange thing to say, but here is where I am going to introduce another term which is frequently brought up in the tournament scene, playing by intent. Playing by intent involves ensuring that there is a direct line of communication between you and your opponent throughout the game, and that all the moves you are making are clear and agreeable to both parties. Playing by intent means that it is unlikely there will be a dispute about specific engagements during the game, since you will have already cleared everything with your opponent before these things occur. But what does that look like? As someone who plays a combat-heavy army, before I move any of my models in the movement phase, I will measure the distance between them and any targets I intend to charge later on in the charge phase. I will then also ask my opponent to double-check this measurement. This means we can easily subtract the movement value of my unit from that distance to calculate the charge distance. Once I have done this and moved the unit, I will place 2 dice, which are different colors to my other dice, next to the unit, with the value facing up that corresponds to the charge distance, so that we can easily reference back to it when the charge phase rolls around. Similarly, from a shooting army's perspective, ensuring that you both agree on lines of sight before and after movement is very important. And these are just some examples of playing by intent. At its core, the concept is all about speaking to your opponent about the moves you are making and what you intend to do with them. It means that you will be playing the game together, instead of you playing the game of Warhammer at your opponent. Overall, I found that consistently this makes for an enjoyable experience, with little to no disagreements at the table. After I've discussed if we will play the game by intent, I like to bring up the subject of takebacks. This can be a little bit of a dicey subject, since it can be difficult to draw a distinct line, but generally, I like to know going into a game if we plan to play a tight game where there are no takebacks of moves or not. Personally, I like to play with some level of takebacks, where if my opponent makes an obvious mistake that can be easily and quickly rectified, they can then do that. Some people prefer to play a tight game where mistakes are punished. Both methods are equally valid to play, but having the discussion about which of these methods you intend to play the game by means you know what you are getting into. Finally, in the pre-game discussion, I like to cover where we will roll dice, how we are defining cock dice, and if we will play using a chess clock or not. Personally, I like to play with chess clocks since it ensures that both parties get an even amount of time to play the game within the allotted limit, but if you are brand new to tournaments, it can be an added stress to the game, especially if you have not practiced with a chess clock beforehand. In part 1 of this series, I did recommend practicing games with a chess clock or to the tournament time, but naturally not everyone is going to have this opportunity. Regardless, have the discussion with your opponent and decide how you will divide up the allotted time for the round. This means that neither party will feel hard done by when the call is made for dice down. Additionally, if it has not been covered in the event pack, now is a good time to discuss how you will treat terrain and the board. Is there a clearly defined border for area terrain? Are you counting the ground floor windows as a line of sight blocking? How would you define each piece according to the core rules? Covering all this now will ensure that the game proceeds smoothly and without debate. All of this and more is part of the pre-game discussion, and a solid chat which covers the most important aspects of the game you are about to play will help set the tone for the next 3 hours, ensuring that the experience is an enjoyable one. When it comes to actually playing the game though, there are some things you can do which will make for a smoother play experience. Aside from using a scoring app like Tabletop Battles, here are some of my top tips. Arrange your dice into numbered groups. These could be groups of 4, 5, 10 or 12 dice. It doesn't really matter, and it depends on what the easiest layout for you is. Generally, I like to go in something I call blocks of berserkers, i.e. how many attacks an individual berserker has. This means you can quickly count and grab blocks of dice from your pool rather than counting out individual dice from a bag. On that note, a dice tray can be a really useful tool since it focuses all your dice rolling into one distinct area, making it easy to regroup them afterwards. Sit down when it's not your turn. Warhammer tournaments involve a lot of standing, so do your back a favour by taking the pressure off when you are not the active player. Set up a sideboard. If the tables are well laid out, you'll hopefully have a little space to the side of the board where you can have your rules, dead models, reserves, etc. Knowing what is there and having it to hand means that you don't waste time fishing in your bag for that last Terminator who is due to be coming out of Deep Strike. Plan your turn during your opponent's one. This will really speed up your decision making when the turn flips back to you and means you aren't constantly playing a reactive game. But on that mode, taking a moment to stop is a perfectly valid thing to do too. Don't rush your turns if you don't have to. Play patiently and show patience to your opponent. Know your rules and how to reference them. No tournament player will know every single index or codex inside out, but there is an onus on you to get your rules correct and to know where those rules are located. Some interactions are intricate and finicky, and make sure that you are above board with everything that you are doing. Here on the Red Path, competitive integrity is one of our key philosophies, and personally, I think there is nothing more important in a tournament than ensuring you are both playing a fun and fair game. So just make sure that your rules are correct and that you're not slipping up on anything. Lastly, just be nice. You probably don't know your opponent. You don't know their life story. It might have taken an incredible amount of effort for them to attend this event, or they could be very nervous about the game. Not everyone is going to be extroverted and outgoing at the table, and it is important to keep in mind that Warhammer is a hobby where people from all walks of life are welcome. Treat your opponent with the respect you would want to be shown. You're going to be hanging out with them for quite a while, so make sure that the experience is as positive as it can be, and you never know, you might end up making a brilliant new friend. That about covers the section on playing the game. There are tons of intricate tips and tricks I could get into, but it would take so much time. Like many other aspects of a tournament, preparation and communication really are the most important aspects. For the finer elements of playing tournament games, you can hop into our Discord where there are constant conversations about the competitive game, and if you want a more personal, focused approach to getting better, you can join our Patreon. But once the dust settles and the intensity dies down, what do you do before the next round starts? The time between rounds is much like the vast expanse of empty space. You will float through the event hall, directionless, aimless, looking for somewhere, anywhere to go. All jokes aside, the time between tournament rounds can be a slightly odd experience, so how best do you optimize your time? Firstly, and most importantly, ask yourself how you're feeling. Are you hungry? Hydrated? Do you need to birth a demon in the nearest toilet cubicle? Once you have these answers, you can structure your break between rounds. I know I've said it a bunch, but look after yourself. Tournaments are intense and exhausting experiences, and use the break time to recharge. It can be a good way of avoiding gassing out too early. Some tournaments will provide food, or maybe there's going to be somewhere local that you can grab a bite to eat. But using the break to fuel up on carbs and protein is a fantastic start. If you're low energy, grab a coffee or rehydrate. Long story short, ask your body what it needs and then give it that answer. Neglecting yourself during a tournament is far too easy to do and far too costly, so don't do it. If you've attended the event with friends, maybe check in on their tables next. Just make sure you don't interrupt their game. They are probably dialed in and trying to focus, so spectate from a respectful distance and make sure that you're not giving them unsolicited advice. Alternatively, just stroll around and take in all the wonderful armies and atmosphere surrounding you. Remember, pretty much every single person here loves Warhammer as much or maybe more than you. It's a unique experience, so drink it in and enjoy it. There's almost certainly going to be lots of gorgeous miniatures floating about, and if you see someone with a particular piece that catches your eye and they aren't engaged in a game, let them know. People love hearing praise and compliments, and it probably means a lot to them if you share your appreciation of their effort and art. Some events will also have a period during one of the breaks to vote on the best painted army. As this isn't typically the focus of a competitive tournament, many people won't even bother casting a vote, but it's a good opportunity to look around at the displayed armies and pick a favourite one. On a personal level, tournaments are a way for me to showcase an army that I put a lot of time into, and winning the best painted prize is more prestigious for me than hitting the podium. So take a brief moment to savour the work that talented painters have done, or get your own army up on display and see how you do. If the event spans 2 days, you may also have to decide what to do with your evening between these days. This is where things get a little bit dicey. Being an Irishman, I normally end up in the pub, and it's not uncommon for me to stay out too late, missing hours of sleep and waking up the next day feeling like I belong in a Death Guard army. But to be brutally honest, tournaments are a social experience, and there is so much socializing to be done on the night after day one. You can commiserate with your buddies or regale them with tales of glory, flavoured accordingly of course, and some events will actually set socials, which make for a fantastic opportunity to make new friends, especially if you find it a little bit harder to mingle with new people. Remember, going to one of these events, everyone there loves Warhammer, so you will have a common ground to talk about. The sensible thing to do, of course, is to go to your hotel and get a solid night's sleep, but it would be remiss of me to neglect talking about what can be a really fun aspect of tournaments. Of course, don't feel pressured into attending socials like this, and if it is your first tournament, it can just be a solid idea to get a good night's rest and hit day 2 feeling refreshed. So this pretty much wraps up my top tips for attending a Warhammer tournament. There's a whole other discussion to be had when it comes to dealing with the aftermath of a tournament and how to process the emotions you will be feeling in the wake of an intense weekend of 40k. We're going to cover that part next week, and Jack from the Red Path will be running through his top tips for dealing with those post-tournament blues. Hopefully though, you've picked up some good ideas today and are feeling a little bit more confident about jumping into an event. As I say, it's an experience like nothing else, and it's one of the best ways to enjoy this wonderful hobby. If you found this video useful and enjoyed the content, it would mean a lot to us if you dropped a comment, a like, or a subscribe here. It really helps us out and helps us grow. If you really love what we do and you want to support the channel, you can join our Patreon, which gives you access to curated and focused hobby or competitive channels within our Discord. We have tons of other content on Twitch, YouTube and Spotify, and a continuous conversation in Discord, and we'd love to see you there. Until the next one though, I've been Dara, and you've been watching The Red Path, so stay healthy, stay safe, and kill Mainburn.